Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to our Virtual Connect series. This session is hosted by our Business of Architecture Knowledge Community. Thanks for them to putting this conversation together, and they're going to discuss the business case for sustainable design. We've submitted this program for HSW credit with AIA. Approval is pending, so we'll be sure to get that to you once it gets approved. And as always, we ask you to be a participant in this conversation as well. You do that through the Q&A function in your Zoom bar at the bottom. Throughout today's presentation, we've already got some questions lined up from the panelists themselves in the Business of Architecture Knowledge Community, but of course yours are just as important. So we'll get to those as they come in. Joining us today for our session, we have a moderator from the Business of Architecture Committee, and then three of our distinguished members. The first I'll introduce is Cheri Giroud. Cheri is an FAIA member of the AIA, a licensed architect having practiced in the private sector for over 30 years. Prior to joining the Office of State Architect as the state architect, she worked for the University of Colorado. Elizabeth Gilmore is also joining us, and she's a licensed architectural engineer and is president and founder of Energetics Consulting Engineers, a boutique energy consulting firm in Denver. And we have Paul Hutton, FAIA and lead fellow. Paul's the chief sustainability officer at Cuningham Group Architecture. He's dedicated his 40-year career to the integration of sustainability and innovative design. And last but not least, we have Eric Oakland. Eric's a member of the Business of Architecture Knowledge Community and principal of Cuningham Group Architecture, who will be moderating today's conversation. So I'll turn it over to Eric to begin our discussion and welcome all of the panelists for sharing their expertise with us. Take it away.
Thank you, Mike. Just wanted to talk a little bit about the Business of Architecture with the Knowledge Committee. So that's a committee that meet once a month, and we are starting our volunteer efforts soon. So if everybody would like to volunteer, please reach out to Megan. Basically, our committee focuses on the business side of architecture, which ranges anything from risk management, legal matters, contracts, business development. And one of the topics that we came up with recently was about sustainability. In discussions with the committee, this topic came up that with Denver starting the new green stretch codes, that sustainability is becoming more and more embedded within the business of architecture itself, rather than just kind of an add-on function or something that a consultant can handle. But started the discussion with the committee about how firms are adapting to the new codes and also how they are transforming their business model to address sustainability. So that's how this topic and panel discussion really started. Thank you today for joining us. We've got three panelists which represent kind of different aspects of the business and also a lot of experience with sustainability. I know Elizabeth and Paul, you've been working on the Denver stretch codes yourselves and have a huge knowledge base of that. So with that, I will kind of start the discussion, and we came up with a list of questions that I could start with. And this first question is really to Paul and Elizabeth. Is there a business case for including sustainability in your designs?
Well, you know, I often tell folks in my firm, and Eric, you've heard this too, that I believe there is no business for architecture without sustainability. And that if an architecture firm hopes to stay relevant as a business, as a thriving business into the future, it's going to have to keep sustainability very near the top of its priority list. And it's going to have to invest in upgrading its tools, its skills, and understanding, and its ability to implement sustainability. And I'll offer up a couple of examples of why I feel that is the case, why I feel so strongly that's the case. In the last 6 months, I have seen a higher percentage of proposals come to our attention that have incorporated more requirements around sustainability than ever before. And it's a wide range of criteria that I'm seeing. There's a little bit of an increase in uptick in clients requesting rating systems, whether that's LEED or Living Building Future. A lot of proposals now are saying they want to see a path to net zero energy. I even had a proposal recently, totally unexpected, that said it wanted to know everything about our internal operations and our carbon footprint. So that's really going pretty deep. And so to me, this year has really been a point of change in clients' expectations of design professionals. And the final thing I'll make a point about this is I think in the corporate world, brand identity now is really tied into sustainability. So larger corporations have already moved very rapidly toward a realization that they have to behave sustainably and demonstrate that for their consumers. And that's moving to smaller and smaller scales of business. So that's my take on your initial question.
Elizabeth, what are you seeing?
Yeah, it's a exciting times for sure. We're seeing the same trends as Paul and your group are seeing. The big challenge is, how do we bring all buildings to that? You know, how do we make that an inclusive norm? And it comes right down to the heart of your question, is how do we make the business case for it? We talked about this before, but in my little world, the big hot topic right now is building electrification. And we can make simple changes to a building sustainability by changing over as much as we can to be electrified systems. And if we as designers can make a case that the electrified building is as cheap or even cheaper to build, and just make that first cost building the right building to build, we're going to win that sustainability case every time. So that's what I'm hoping that we're going to see even over the next few years, the next few cold cycles, is a trend towards the norm of the design actually being the sustainable design without labeling it as such.
I think with the electrification, kind of the next couple steps is that, is the end goal to get to net zero, and how does that impact the operating cost and the return of investment to the clients that you're seeing?
Well, I guess I'll keep talking. It's hard. ROI is a challenging metric because we have so many buildings that are tenant occupied. So, it's a conversation to have with a client about what is an acceptable ROI. Can we do anything beyond 1 to 3 years? But there's still ways that you can take some of that initial investment off the table. Helping your clients be creative about financing. We have Cpas Financing, which it attaches the funding of certain building elements to the building rather than to the developer. So you essentially have a loan for a PV array be going through your tax assessor's office. So then when the building is sold, it's that stays with the building. So it's just, we can get a little creative with how we make those things happen. But you can also use that net zero or even net zero ready building in other ways. Net zero building for the Denver Green Buildings Ordinance, checks your box for code compliance. Maybe it helps you achieve a few other things. So there's metrics we have to keep in mind beyond just simple old ROI. It's we don't always win the battle if that's the only thing to consider.
Right. Yeah, Eric, I think it's safe to say if a building or project is going to achieve net zero energy, then of course the operating cost is going to be significantly reduced. Although I'll even introduce a caveat into that. We're also wary of making buildings too complicated. And we have seen in the push towards sustainability in the last 15 years or so, some buildings have gotten so complex that it's been hard for their clients to maintain them. And some good examples exist within, I would say, the best school program, where some rural districts for whom access to highly trained technical personnel is difficult have struggled to maintain some of those really high performing building systems. So we always want to keep an eye on making sure that that maintenance capability is there. And so, but I want to talk a little bit more about that whole return on investment piece too. And so, we are really careful not to tell our clients that you should be able to expect the return on investment to be really quick for a net zero energy building if you're only looking at energy costs. Because the reality is that here in Colorado and in most of the US, we still have extraordinary low energy costs. Now, I guess we can give a lot of credit to our utility companies for doing a good job managing that on behalf of consumers. But we try to extend the discussion of return on investment to be much more than utilities. So we try to talk to our clients about what are all the benefits of green and sustainable building to them, not just simply lower utility bills. And that's where we feel like we have a much better ability to make a strong case.
Great. Hey, one thing that came up in our discussions with the committee is the fact that, there are some large firms and there are some large firms here in Colorado, and each of them were trying to compete sometimes in the same world on sustainability. And so, Cheri, I wanted to ask you, what are the components to a team that's successful in running sustainable designs?
Thank you, Eric, and thank you very much for inviting me today. I think it depends on the client, and speaking from the state's perspective, in my role, I have purview over all of the state buildings in Colorado, plus all the institutions of higher ed, the public institutions and the community colleges. So just as we have a lot of buildings that are over 50 years old. In fact, if you look at the Boulder campus, the predominant number is, I think, over 75 years old. So there's different challenges with different buildings depending on what your project is. Ideally, if you look at something like CSU or the CU system, they're trying to go beyond what the statutory requirements are. And in the state of Colorado right now, the statutory requirements are that you don't have to use any particular sustainability or any particular program like LEED. You could use well building, whatever. But they require that whatever you use has to be an equivalent to LEED Gold. So in order to do that, you're going to need a team that includes not only an architect, but your structural engineer. You're going to need someone that has an energy background, and so they're going to have to do the assessments. And I have the pleasure of sitting on the CU Design Review Board. And one of the things that we struggle with the most is that team that you bring in from the very beginning is going to set your sustainability goals. And the thing that we try to press to them is you need to make sure that sustainability partner is there regardless of the project delivery method, regardless of whether you're design, build, CMGC, whatever you want to use, you've got to have that sustainability expert there early, because there's so many decisions that are made not only by the architect, the engineer, the landscape architect. My room just went dark. I apologize. I'm up at a job site in Loveland for one of the COVID hospitals. I'm sorry. I guess I didn't move around enough. But anyway, so I would say the more sophisticated the team is, the more well-versed the team is, the better they're going to be. I did see last year in the legislature that we had a lot of carbon interest area legislation. And so what we're going to be doing is looking, I believe those bills are going to be coming back again this year. And I think we're going to be analyzing our carbon footprint a whole lot more on a material by material basis. The other thing we're seeing is the governor issued an executive order in December. And what his goal is that he wants to see an electrification of our machinery so that we're not fossil fuel based. So the state, because it's so varied, because executive orders are not required to be, this particular one is not required to be followed by higher ed, perhaps they don't have to be as stringent. But one of the things my office has done is that we now require for any project that is put forward, we require a life cycle cost analysis, just so we're starting to get people to the point where they understand, regardless of the level of sophistication of the facility operators, we're trying to get them to the point where they understand the basics of what we're trying to do and move forward. So I guess that was a long-ended response to not really probably answering your question.
No, appreciate it. I think, your response kind of sparks another question that I have is, with so many different kind of sustainability programs that are out these days, like well certification, LEED, enterprise green communities is one that, Elizabeth and I do all the time on just about every project these days. But is there kind of the question that came from the committee was, what type of knowledge base, what would be best of a knowledge base to have within your firm to provide sustainable design on projects? And is there any specific tools that you would recommend, or software, or anything to make it a little bit more efficient?
Well, statutorily, I can't recommend any one program or any one software type. We're looking more at just a standard. You know, I work a lot with Victor Oljai with the Rocky Mountain Institute, and Victor has a lot of incredible tools that they use when they're doing their assessments. You know, it's simple things like making sure you check your concrete, you make sure you check your the reflectivity on your glass, you make sure, I mean, I'm speaking to the choir here. You guys know, the steps, but just making sure, being open to examining the building in as many ways as you possibly can. I don't endorse chasing points with LEED. That doesn't do any good. Just taking the most sustainable approach possible. And it would be wonderful if we really could empower your sustainability consultant, just so that they're not viewed as an add-on, that they're viewed as an integral part of the
Part of the
team.
team. Yep.
Yeah.
You know, Eric,
Paul.
I'd like to kind of jump on that question about the tools, in particular the software. You know, as architects, we're increasingly dependent on software. And as from a business perspective, it's become an enormous part of our overhead cost and burden. And one of the things that's emerged, I think, for us in the last couple of years is the fact that almost all the tools we're using for sustainability analysis, whether that's daylighting, energy, you know, glare, thermal comfort, all those kind of things, are completely apart from our normal production tools that are basically now all in the Revit platform. And that is a serious problem for the business of architecture. And I believe that the architecture profession needs to get more proactive in working with the major software vendors and seeking integration of these tools. Because we're in a point right now where we develop a Revit program, it gets exported into something else for analysis, and then the results are imported back in. And we've been tracking this, there's a lot of time and energy lost as a business to this aspect of how we're doing the analysis. So I don't want to get too far into this, but it's actually a real problem for designers, and it needs some attention.
Elizabeth, what are you saying?
Yeah, I have actually a really easy thing that you all can do. And I'm going to go back to the building electrification topic because that thinking about designing for electrification is a different way of designing. And that's something that we're trying to encourage our teams to think about even before you put pen to paper. I mean, there's major zero cost things that need to happen in order to help get your building off of natural gas. You know, designing in units that stack so you can have energy recovery, thinking about where windows go so that your supply can be far enough away from your exhaust, designing a boiler room that can accommodate a heat pump boiler instead of a natural gas boiler. I mean, there's no point in modeling things if the building can't accommodate them. So if we can start to address those topics while there's no cost impact, so that then when you can evaluate it in your models, you have a huge chance of getting that actually into the project at a teeny tiny cost relative to what it would have been, you know, if you've already sized the area you have for your transformers and it can't possibly get any bigger because it's already gone through SDP and we can't go back. Thinking about those topics early, you know, even before I get on the project, it has to happen, you know, as soon as you're sitting down with your building developer and planning for that from a space planning perspective. So from a training, that means talking to your MEP folks. How big does my boiler room have to be? Where does it go? Can I put it on the roof? Can I put it in the garage? Do I have to keep it in the interior of the building? All of those questions, just knowing what an electrified building looks like is a different way of designing. So having that in your mind as you lay out some of those really key components has a huge impact and is no cost.
Yeah, you're right. It's one of those things that, you know, a lot of those spaces are laid out really early on in the project, even before MEP starts really kind of stepping into the picture too. So that's a great point to bring up on the architectural side. Kind of the next question is for Cheri, and can you provide an overview of where the codes and regulations are headed with sustainability becoming embedded in a lot of our requirements these days?
So the state of Colorado operates under standard codes that everybody else does. We typically adopt the codes 1 year after they are adopted, but our biggest challenge right now is making sure that we attend to the legislative desires, because they are becoming more and more involved in determining building materials. We talked about carbon impact. And like I said, we also have the governor's executive order where basically he's looking at things like the electrification of state vehicles. So because of that, we need to have charging stations. And because we don't adhere to anybody's in a local building code, we've been trying to say we're usually as stringent as most other. There are some exceptions. Boulder, we're probably not where they are right now, and we're probably not where Denver is, but I believe we're headed that way. So, and I think that's only going to continue because we have a real interest in our legislators are very, very interested in making sure that we are as sustainable as possible. So, and also ADA. I mean, I've joined a task force currently that we are looking at what ADA provides, but we're going to go beyond that. So, and I believe we're going to be doing the same thing with sustainability. This administration, it's important to them. They see value in it. It impacts people's lives. It impacts the governor's initiative to be an employer of choice. So we're doing all of those things. And the only, I would have to mention that the only thing the state does not control is fire code. We always defer to local code on that because the state doesn't have a fire department they can call on. So we partner with our local. But
yeah, it's whoever needs to respond. So
yeah. You don't want me with a bucket. So we're just trying to, I think we never know from legislative session to legislative session where our code is going to be. But we do know that the legislature is very interested in it, and it's moving forward at a rate far faster and far greater than it has in recent years.
yeah.
And, Eric, I think it's interesting to know with the building code that right now the IBC is on a trajectory with their 3-year cycle that they're going to hit net zero energy as base code somewhere around the year 2035-ish, right in there is what it looks like based on their year over or cycle over cycle decreasing in energy use. And that's great. And we're glad to have that. The problem, of course, in Colorado is as a home rule state that we have so many municipalities that don't adopt the most current code the way Cheri and the state do only 1 year after release. And so to me, a fundamental question is there anything the state can do to help incentivize? We can't force, but can we incentivize or offer training or other tools or mechanisms to try to get more municipalities and authorities having jurisdiction to keep up with code? Besides being a business issue for us as architects, having to deal with 4 different codes in the same year, that's a complication already. But it would really help energy efficiency across the state. It would help electrification, for example, if we could get municipalities to be more consistent in their adoption of codes.
Yeah, I've started to see a lot of the surrounding communities around Denver pretty much keep up or be ahead of Denver just a little bit, which is great. But every once in a while, you still run into someone who's on a really older code.
In particular, you get some pretty old codes.
Yep. Elizabeth, what are you seeing?
Yeah, it's a major challenge, and if all I do is keep up with the energy codes, I don't know how you guys do what you do, try to keep up with the codes and everything else that you do, because just keeping up with the codes for me is a full-time job, literally. But you know, as you say, there's so many different codes and different municipalities with different strategies. You know, even our 2 most aggressive codes in the state, Denver and Boulder, are wildly different. You know, they're both based on the 2018 IECC, but the compliance methods lead to dramatically different buildings. You know, interesting story. We had the same developer, same design team building a spec office building in Boulder and Denver at the same time. Completely different projects because of how the codes drove them, which is, you know, really interesting process. And, you know, one building was actually, you know, ended up better than the other building, and it's not the one that you would expect. But all of the codes are not yet fully encouraging electrification in the way that we'd like to see them. You know, like Boulder's code, for example, everything defers, and Fort Collins as well, defers to ASHRAE 90.1 2016 Appendix G, which for Colorado is a gas baseline. So we go back to this problem of ultra cheap gas and trying to document compliance by energy cost when we still have electricity that's more expensive than natural gas. So trying to shift our codes in a way that encourage and reward the high efficiency electric systems, getting away from that gas baseline, getting away from energy cost as a documentation protocol. It's a challenging shift. I mean, everybody's trying to do this, don't get me wrong. We're all working on this, but it is a challenging shift and a different way of thinking. But what other ways can we encourage more sustainability? Like the Denver Green Code, maybe it's making your whole permitting process easier or less expensive. Maybe it means like what Boulder's doing, maybe it means you could have a smaller solar array on your roof. There's other ways that we can still remind folks that there is a benefit, push through this cost barrier, and it's going to make compliance easier because of XYZ. So knowing those codes, or at least having someone on your team that knows those codes, can help give you a little bit more power, I should say, to help encourage sustainability.
I would add to that, and Elizabeth, you're completely right. Getting back to Paul's question about how do you impact local control, and Colorado is a local control state. I mean, and it's also a very weak governor state. This is my former legislator, but as Texas, Colorado, and Arizona were all formed, their constitutions were written right after the Civil War. And so there was a very anti-federalist feel. And so because of that, that's why we're very local control, because we wanted to give more power to the legislature than less power to the governor. The wonderful thing about that, and most of our taxes are collected at a local level. So that gives AIA an opportunity. They always say you need to get to know your local officials. We really do have an opportunity to make an impact locally, but we're going to have to engage with the people that sit on the commissions, sit on the boards, the local elected officials, in order to influence them to make the changes and to do what they're doing. Currently, right now, I mean, what Governor Polis is doing is pretty, I don't know if anybody's seen his energy initiatives with his declaration from December, but he's got some pretty great goals there, and he's doing it because it's the best he can do. But even if you took that as a model to bring it down, to recommend the same adoption locally, I think you would see a real change in the way we build.
Just looking kind of forward, I know that a lot of firms in the AIA has brought up the 2030 challenge. What are some of the changes that firms can make either today or in the next 10 years, since we're 10 years away from that? What are the changes that firms might need to fully embrace to meet the 2030 challenge? And sorry, I meant that question to go to Paul.
Oh, okay. Well, we've been signatories to the 2030 challenge for a decade. We've been reporting for now 7 years. So we have, I think, fairly rigorously as a firm worked to try to embrace that and live that out. But it is quite a difficult challenge. The target in 2030 challenge today is that we should be 80% below the CBEX baseline for commercial buildings. And the reality is, of the 200 plus firms that report nationally, those firms average only 49% better than the baseline. So there's already a gap from 49% to 80%. And those are just the firms that report. There's another hundreds of firms that are signatories but don't report. So the reality is that, in guessing, firms are probably only averaging somewhere around 40% better than baseline, only halfway to the current target. And we've only got now 10 years left to get to the net zero energy goal of 2030. So what we see is a need for some drastic acceleration on the part of the architectural profession. And my concern is that we're starting to bump up against as a profession, we've done sort of the easy stuff. That first 50% wasn't too hard to make happen, and that's what we've seen achieved. And now we see that firms are struggling to get that last piece to get all the way down. So I think we need both technological innovation to continue And we need more firms to be more committed to doing the things like Elizabeth described, embedded in the process, and start with that as your goal and understand what it takes to get there. So I think it's an even deeper level of commitment, but I'm an advocate of 2030. I think it's done a lot of good. And one thing I like about it, it's completely flexible. It doesn't tell you how to get there. It just says, here's the target, folks. You figure it out. Show us how you're going to get to 80%. And in 5 years, by the way, or 4 years from now, we're going to be at 90% reduction. And so I love the open-endedness of it. You figure it out. You be creative and make it happen.
So Paul, I did want to ask you, just because I see your reports within our firm about our carbon footprint, which are fantastic to see, but how, I know one thing is that we, as a firm, we end up traveling quite a bit, either by airplane or by car.
Yep.
And with the pandemic, how do you expect our carbon footprint to be reduced across the board over over the 2020 year?
Well, we actually, as a firm, committed to tracking our entire corporate carbon footprint 3 years ago. And after a year of rigorous analysis, found out that we were at 5.72 metric tons per employee per year. And, I didn't know it was that good or bad. I had to do a little bit of digging around with the large firm roundtable to find out that was about average. And as you alluded to, Eric, the shocking thing to me, as a firm with 6 US offices and 2 overseas offices, fully 59% of that footprint was air travel. Like, holy cow, can you believe that? It was the air travel. And another big chunk, 20 to 30% was all the other traveling we do, going to job sites, project meetings, and we even estimated commuting. So we committed back then to offsetting our footprint fully. By the year 2022, we started offsetting travel. And so I'm actually looking for creative ways to offset our footprint within the home state of each of our 6 US offices. So that's kind of where we're trying to head. But of course, the pandemic has, as you pointed out, drastically reduced, probably cut our carbon footprint literally in half overnight, starting in March. So now we'll just continue to work on the smaller pieces of our office building efficiency and all the other pieces that go into it.
Elizabeth, I wanted to ask you, with electrification, kind of my mind goes right to solar panels and the discussion about renewable energy. Is there an opportunity for firms to embrace renewable energy?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Renewable energy can contribute a lot of things more than, it's not just putting lipstick on a pig and slapping some solar panels on your roof. With the newer codes, 2015 and up, you can use your solar array to help achieve code compliance. So it can help you do some cost savings with, other elements of the building systems. If you're already required to be solar ready, like we are in a lot of codes, taking that one step further, owners are finding that that's not a big step to take. Once you have the infrastructure there, your roof is ready for it. A solar array can solve some problems rather than just being a cost to add on there. I like to share with folks just my simple rule of thumbs, and you can write this down. Usually estimate that a kilowatt of PV takes up between 80 and 100 square feet of space on your roof, and it's going to generate, you can use roughly 1,400 kilowatt hours per year. Multiply that times 10 cents per kilowatt hour offset, and you can provide your clients with really quick back of the envelope calculations for what they can expect to see from a savings perspective, and compare that to maybe some of your high-end HVAC. How does the savings from that solar array investment compare to the savings from your ground source heat pump investment? Which one's going to be more cost effective? And you may find that you're the hero of the day when you can get some pretty great savings from a less expensive upgrade.
Yeah, I felt like a hero a couple of years back when we did a project to put solar panels on, and the client called and asked us to come out and take a look at the project because something was wrong, because they got a bill from Excel that was 0. And I was like, no, that was the intent. That's exactly what we wanted.
That's fantastic.
So we were pretty excited about that. They got that and they were pretty nervous. They were like, something's wrong.
The only other thing I would add to that, because Elizabeth, you're so right. And what I'm noticing is in higher ed, when I was at CU, it was amazing to me to see that the students, prospective students, when they would look at a school, they would look at the school, is it someplace I want to hang out? Does it look like, what's my comfort level and everything? But they would also, they rank them on a sustainability metrics. And so, if the more sustainable the school, a lot of students that made decisions as to where they were going to go. And by the same token, that's kind of what we're doing at a state level too with our employees. One of the initiatives is we're working on as an employer of choice. And I am currently, because of COVID, and this could be a silver lining from COVID, is the fact that it's keeping us home and making us think better and smarter about the way we do business. I know a lot of architectural firms that say that when they interview for projects, it's easier for them to do it on Zoom than it is when they go and get there, because there seems to be a leveling of the playing field. I don't know what it is, but they like it. But I also know that because we're going to be shrinking our footprints, our building footprints, we're also going to be redesigning, re-examining the way we use our space. And for the state of Colorado, that's an initiative I've been working on right now. And it's really exciting because not only do we have the opportunity to improve the built environment of the employees of the state, but we also have an opportunity to be more budget effective with the dollars that we spend for space. And it all gets back to ground source heat pumps, solar panels. We have solar garden projects that we're working on. And the reason I mention all of that is it gets back to the whole idea of helping an architectural firm understand that coming to the table with an interest and an enthusiasm of renewable energy and sustainability is actually really, really smart, because the clients want to see it, they want to hear it, regardless of who they are, how sophisticated, how not so, how rural, how urban. They all want to see it.
Cheri, I think just kind of a follow-up question. I know that you work with the state on COVID facilities, and the question really is she needs electrification there. With air quality, air quality was becoming more and more of a topic in discussion about healthy living. Paul, I know that we deal with that in schools especially, but Cheri, maybe you can explain the level of discussions about indoor air quality and how you think that that's going to move forward in the future.
Well, and thank you for that. We are very early in on our process of our space analysis, programming, utilization. But one of the things that the state knows is they don't want to bring people into state buildings. In other words, they don't want the public in state buildings. They don't want to bring employees into state buildings until we're sure we can keep them safe. And the challenge we have is the fact that we're dealing with some of the oldest buildings in the state. And the maintenance on those buildings, we've been spending them on other really, really important areas of state government. And so there's a lot of deferred maintenance, and probably HVAC systems are the biggest culprit, roofs and HVAC systems. So that's part of the challenge that we have to solve during this time, that we don't have a lot of money. We still need to take care of the people of Colorado, and yet we have a huge issue to solve. So we're really in the very beginning stages, looking at circulation levels, looking at cycles of circulation, air circulation. But mostly what we're doing is we're planning for a future that the governor recently was quoted as saying that, we'll be looking at 30% of the state workforce working from their homes. And we don't really know what that number is going to be yet, because we have to get through the analysis with each state agency. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's not more than that. And so then we have to look at what are we going to do with the buildings that we have? How are we going to sustainably approach those buildings? What is the best, what's the best value for those buildings? How do we repurpose them? If we repurpose them, do they go to low income housing with maybe a daycare in the main level? How are we going to take care of, what other state problem can we take care of once we solve the problem of getting the people of Colorado and state employees back to work safely?
Yeah, I think just along with the state I think every office is kind of in that same camp of asking those same questions and not knowing kind of where things are going to land about employees working from home, or, how much distance are we going to need between workstations? And I think we're all asking those same questions.
Yeah, and when we're doing it, we're not doing it. We're doing it now during COVID, and then we're looking at a medium term, and then we're looking at a long term. And we don't have all the answers yet, but we do know the world has changed, and that we're not going back to the way that we were before. The only aspect of it that is concerning to me is there's a sociability aspect of people. And I think if you talk to anyone that has a high school student, you'll know that this is a really rough year for them, because the sociability aspect, the things they envisioned for their senior year, that's not the way their year is going. And then I wonder, my granddaughter started kindergarten this year. What's going to be different about the way she lives her life today compared to the rest of the world? And I didn't mean to slip into COVID, but it all seems we have opportunities because of the pandemic, but we also have challenges.
That's correct. Paul, just wanted to give you an opportunity. I know that you've worked with projects revolving around indoor air quality. Maybe you can discuss a project of yours.
Well, yeah, actually, we've been pretty focused on indoor air quality for the last several years. I would say it really got started or jump-started by the release of that Harvard cognitive function study. And for us, and I think it should have been for the entire profession, that was a bit of a wake-up call, that the reality is that the majority of our non-residential buildings are frankly underventilated in terms of the amount of fresh air that's being provided. And the easiest measure of that is CO2 concentration. So we use CO2 as a proxy for indoor air quality generally. And what we find looking around at our own office building and other office buildings at schools in particular, is that we've got concentrations of CO2, and therefore we assume other contaminants that are well above what would be the current standard. And we think that current standard is already too high. So we've undertaken to voluntarily, in our recent designs, provide more fresh air than ASHRAE or building code requires. And we're finding that our clients are responding very positively to that they're finding that the air simply feels better when they go inside those buildings. And we've also done a recent project, one up in Boulder County. You might be thinking of the Meadowlark School. That was our first building based in natural ventilation as the primary ventilation HVAC strategy, with mechanical ventilation designed as backup. And what we're seeing is an amazing improvement in reduced CO2 concentration and overall indoor air quality in buildings like that. So we're really excited about using more and more of natural ventilation as a primary strategy, especially here in Colorado, where it's such an easy strategy to implement, where the climate is so favorable for that approach. And by the way, it's great at saving energy.
I want to chime in there, Eric, if I can, because that's, obviously an energy topic as well. Every CFM that we introduced into the building that has to be conditioned is obviously taking us the wrong direction from a sustainability standpoint. So we do have some kind of, conflicting goals here, but it's still something that can be combated. On the natural ventilation topic, I do just want to remind all architects that anytime we have a big rooftop unit that is required to have economizer mode, that's basically, natural ventilation. That's 100% of our ventilation is coming from outside. So we don't always have a huge energy benefit necessarily, or even a huge ventilation benefit from taking away that economizer capability, except in the times when we go into heating mode. So how do we maintain those higher level, and times when you go into heating mode, you can't really use natural ventilation anyways. So in Colorado here, we have some natural advantages relative to some other regions. But on that end, how do we maintain those higher ventilation levels without our energy costs and usage going through the roof? And again, I'm going to go back to just, architectural planning. It's energy recovery. It's exhaust air energy recovery. So instead of throwing out all that fresh air that you just conditioned, bring it back to that rooftop unit and exchange the heat for the new air that you're bringing in. And you'll have a more efficient building than the one that's less well ventilated. So, architecturally plan for those shafts, create a really comfortable, well-ventilated building that's more efficient than the norm. And you'll win every time. It's easier to comply with code, all kinds of good things. Put a solar panel on that.
Yeah. So one comment that Cheri made was, with the pandemic and everybody's at home, I think everybody's thinking and having a mindset of looking towards the future. We're all wanting to kind of get out of the work from home environment, but there is more of a focus on the future. And one of the things that I know Paul and I talk about too is when do you think, and will there be a time when sustainability is just normal practice, that it's not an add-in? And I always say, is there going to be a time where the word sustainability goes away? That's just our normal operating across the board for architects. Do you see a future with that in mind, Paul?
Well, I think you're right, Eric. And certain aspects of what we call sustainability have become more and more baseline, and we'll probably take them for granted. I think energy efficiency is one of those. I think electrification will happen pretty soon, as well as renewable energy. But I think there's always going to be a next frontier out there, and that is going to continue for quite a long time. So right now, for me, that next frontier is embodied carbon. And frankly, I think embodied carbon right now should be a bigger concern than operational carbon. And we're just barely beginning to talk about it. And even beyond embodied carbon, there's a whole discussion on how do we rethink the economy, especially the part of the economy that's dedicated to construction, around circular economy principles. We have to get away from the concept that linear use of materials and energy is acceptable. Everything has to eventually be a no waste concept. So I think this is what sustainability now is going to evolve into other things in terms of making buildings ever more beneficial. And I think sustainability is become associated with doing less harm. And it's time for us to leave that behind and start thinking about, what does good look like? How does a building actually benefit the environment? How does our activity as designers make a positive difference, instead of, okay, it's just a little less bad than it used to be? So that's how I'm looking at things these days.
I agree. I think we're going to be constantly moving the bar. There's no end. Once we achieve net zero on every project, it's going to be net positive, and that bar is just going to keep moving until our buildings are continually better. It's continual improvement.
So Cheri, are we ever going to get to a point where all of our state buildings aren't 70 years old and on the new sustainability model?
I don't mind them being 70 years old. I just don't want their maintenance level being 70 years
old.
An old building is probably the most sustainable. I just want to make sure that they are as efficient and we're able to get the use we can. I like old things. I like it more and more every year as I get older. But I think we have a higher level of interest cyclically by our state leaders in taking care of buildings, because, and in part because sustainability has become much more popular. So I'm grateful for the rise in interest, because it's just going to improve our buildings.
It is part of that just the removal of fossil fuels in addition? Is that this?
No, there's a bill that will probably pass this year that talks about carbon, just ranking your carbon impact and outlawing certain building materials within the state of Colorado, state buildings. And I think and Paul, you probably know it better, that nationally the work that they've been doing, there's 10 products that they find are the most negative impact on the state, on the carbon footprint. So it would be a matter of limiting those materials in state buildings. There's also a bill that came forward last year, and none of these bills were completed because of COVID. So we sort of had this 3/4 of the way through the legislative session stop. So I expect these bills to come back. There was also a bill that was talking about setting up buildings when you plan them for the most sustainable aspects of the building that you can. In other words, you may not be able to install those solar panels, but right now we want you to set it up. You may not be able to afford the electric car chargers, but we want you to make sure you've got the electrical backup for that. The infrastructure is there. So that kind of really smart thinking that the legislators are thinking about towards just building planning for the state of Colorado is very helpful, because sometimes you need to lead state agencies and higher ed institutions to a different method. There's certain higher ed institutions that they're going to get there before you will anyway, and they already have that in mind. But sometimes it's just the difference between rural and urban, and sometimes the rural are better than the urban. I don't know. I think about I grew up in a ranching family, and I think about the way the schoolhouses used to always, the windows were always on the south side of the building, and you never had windows on the north side. I mean, to me, it's a lot of common sense, and it's good to see that public policy is looking towards common sense when it comes to sustainability. I'm excited.
Yeah, well, thank you. Just one last question for everybody, and we'll maybe have Elizabeth start first. But if you could recommend one change for firms to make right now to help improve their sustainability practices, what would that be?
Well, I'm going to start sounding like a broken record here, but I think it's not just talking about electrification, but knowing when it's going to be a benefit to the project. Now, how can it give your client an advantage, whether it's easier certification compliance, easier code compliance, lower energy costs, whatever that's going to be, getting off of gas use altogether. Just knowing some of those advantages, so you have the power to sell it. While some of those early decisions can be made at a lesser cost impact than might happen later down the road, or once things have gone further. So you can be a major advocate of that by demonstrating that this is helpful, not just something that people have to spend more money on.
Yep. How about you, Paul?
Well, I'll share a policy that I implemented at the beginning of this year. So I already mentioned we monitor every project for its current energy efficiency, and we report that out. But I found it wasn't really making a difference internally. It wasn't motivating behaviors inside the office. So I now issue a report every quarter to every project manager and every principal, showing the results, their energy results on their active projects, and that is tied to their performance review at the end of the year. So I'm getting people's attention finally, because if you don't have firm leadership paying attention and care about it, doesn't matter what staff level is trying to do. You've got to have support at the very top. So that's how I'm trying to make a change.
Yep. Cheri, same question to you.
I think probably whatever your specialty is in your architectural firm, whether you're a small firm or you're a generalist, or you do retail design, or you do hospital design, or you do whatever your specialty is, what I would suggest is you do a deep dive in how sustainability can impact the work that you do. My concern is it gets back to how do you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. And I think if you just start looking at your practice, what drives you, what motivates you, and learn as much as you can to see how sustainability can impact it and make a big difference in it, that would be the best thing I would suggest. And I apologize. My hard stop just moved up. Sorry.
No, that's fine. Actually, we're running out of time today. Mike, did you want to take over? Thank you to Elizabeth, Paul, and Cheri today. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks you three and Eric as well for moderating. It was a vigorous conversation. I love the tone. We talked about wins and champions, and it's aspirational, right? So that's the language we need to hear. The energy industry talks a lot about an all of the above strategy, in terms of the sources of things that power our homes and our vehicles. I think the same analogy works here. And that all of the above for our industry is codes and standards, measurements and goals, incentives and credits, demonstrations and pilots. It takes all four of those arenas to move the needle. And I think as you continually raise the floor, you're also pushing up that ceiling. So you have to be able to address every audience and not just think of, well, we need to bring the laggards further along and require them to do so. You also create opportunities for the early adopters to continue to push the envelope. So I think it's our role as a profession and as design consultants who see this future and the possibility to talk to both of those audiences, no matter where they're at, and move it forward. It's all about propelling the bell. It's not about creating a new model to lay over what already exists. So I'm just hopeful and optimistic based on today's conversation that not only is it the right thing to do, it's a good thing to do, and it does help not only your clients, but it helps the architecture firms as well in terms of having a business that contributes to human flourishing. Thank you all for giving us that inspiration today and pointing out some ways forward.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
I want to make one announcement before we go. Next week, same time, same place, we have a session hosted by IMEG Corporation. That's going to be looking at health-focused solutions for the built environment. Obviously a popular topic right now in the year that we're in. You'll earn 1 HSW credit for attending that session. We thank everybody for sticking around today and hope you enjoyed it. Have a great rest of the week, and we'll see you next time.